off or something, so just type OG here, all here, whatever. Amazing, amazing. I think everybody's now here. Thank you very much. I think this was a very nice debate. We had fun. I hope you did too. Um, just I think let's I'll give you the call and then I'll give you one piece of general feedback when I get there and something like this. I think that might be nicer. In the end, it was a lovely discussion. We ended up unanimous in the unanimous decision. We chatted just to see if we're correct, but we had a similar intuition. And we thought that this debate went on the government bench, in particularly first going to opening government, the second going to closing government, the third going to opening opposition, and the fourth, unfortunately, going to closing opposition. Let's talk about ops versus govs in this particular case. Here is a couple of problems that we saw from oppositions in the setup of the debate in itself, right? So we have a setup from both government teams. Okay, the call is OG, then CG, then OO, then CO. Okay, sorry, yeah, okay. So the setup of the debate that we have from government teams is, first of all, like not every parent is going to use this. This is going to be used. This is going to be used in a specific particular way. Specifically, we have a lot of structural reasons from CG why parents are not going to be abusive towards this and why they're going to use it responsibly or something like this. And we have a characterization that even if these parents are lazy, terrible, or something like this is a better alternative towards something like this. Where oppositions and both oppositions to some extent fail to engage is the engage in a comparative on why the parents who are bad or who are bad actors or something like this are necessarily going to be better without this pill. So I know that there is a lot of things like this is removing the responsibility. They're now going to rely upon the pill. But if opening government is setting up a comparative which says that in the absence of the pill being used, they're going to be potentially violent, abusive, and giving me a lot of mechanisms of why other parenting methods and alternatives are actually quite worse and are quite worse for child psychology and child's development, and also the outcomes that the child will receive in school and all of these things, then a lot of the criticism that we're gaining from both op teams are kind of valid, and we agree with them, but they're just not necessarily having as effective thing, because the comparative, why is your side without this pill better, is not necessarily developed to the extent. But what exactly are we talking about? So opening government sets up the debate and says and talks about couple of main points. One is that this prevents like parents who are lazy, parents who are terrible from creating worse abuses. Second, parents can now focus more on the better and more important aspects of parenting and making their child's life better, rather than focusing on this that is draining their opportunity. And then they give up on that child anyway because they see it's a problem child, it's not your fault or something like this. And secondly, their interactions with school is going to become better. They're not going to spiral into drugs or alcohol, which can ruin their life. So overall, child's life is going to be better. Their relationship with their parents are going to be better. And lastly, what they managed to cram in is this actual conversation that you're going to have with your parents are going to be better and more productive, because when you come back here, it doesn't alter your thoughts like we hear from DPM. You're going to be much more likely to be listened to, because you're not viewed as a problem child. You're viewed as somebody who actually is behaving well but is expressing something that is valid. So people are going to be more likely to listen to you in schools and in some of these things. What we hear as challenges from opening opposition is a couple of things. One is that this is removing the responsibility of the parents, so they're gonna just continue parenting that way, and that's not necessarily good. And secondly, it's gonna ruin the relationship with your child in this particular thing, and the children is gonna become very rebellious and terrible, especially after 18, after they have not been ready for life in this particular thing. The problem with all of these things, and why is not able to overtake opening government, is that this comparative that we have talked about at the beginning is still not present. It's still not very clear why a child that is in a very bad neighborhood or has a very bad parents who do not care or something like this is magically going to have a change and he has a better childhood than in comparison where they're going to have it easier to listen in school, or where they're going to have these conversations that they've been talking about, or where they're not going to incur abuse towards violence or some other forms which opening government proves are existent. So in a sense of not addressing the actual comparative, even though you have the harm of some maybe parents overdoing it to some extent, or how do you say, some parents who would not do it and who are maybe okay parents would now rely on upon this particular thing. The impact on the worst off children who are now not going to spiral into drugs, who are now potentially going to finish school and do all of these things is still existent. Now you have the problem that both oppositions outline towards governments, which is, but you don't change structural barriers that these kids are having, so hence this is useless. But the problem with this still is that it's not addressing that you are actually solving at least one portion of this, which is going to school, not spiraling into crime or to drugs or some of these things. So even insofar that you say that they don't solve every child's problem, that not every child is going to be successful, not every child is not going to enter into crime, they still provide to us comparatively more children who will have better childhood, a better experience with their life in this particular essence. So basically, you're telling to them you're not solving the full problem, but I'm not sure that this is their burden to solve the full problem, because they still have a comparative benefits that they're presenting on their side of the house. So in that sense, this is also not something that is, but not something that was overtaken by opposition. And lastly, this clash on like what about afterwards or something like this. The problem is it still doesn't address it relies on somewhat extreme characterization of how it is going to look like. You're never going to rebel. You're never going to have any talks with your parents. It's going to be like pills 24/7, all of these things. And we have a lot of good mechanisms from opening government telling me that parents are not going to use this in that way, that parents are actually more likely going to be listening to their child. So they're more likely to have these conversations and to actually have a meaningful and better relationships. And hence a lot of the mechanisms of being super rebellious afterwards are not so clear, and not so clear why is it worse than spiraling into drugs, crime, or not finishing school, or being treated badly by your parents are worse. So there are valid points, there are good points. It's just that you're not addressing the comparative that was set up and that was framed by opening government that makes you lose the top half. Let's go to CG. So CG has very interesting and novel responses towards opening opposition, especially towards the more, I think, more extreme point about abuse that is mentioned, like sexual abuse or something like this, which I think successfully tackles it. Opening government admittedly has some of these responses, but I think the biggest blow towards this, it comes in the structural analysis of why this will be regulated, not necessarily just by the governments, but necessarily by the peer pressure and by the parents in characterization of how parents actually operate. So what we get from CG is a very good characterization that parents are not monsters who just drug their children because it's easy. They have other considerations rather than just being easy in this particular thing. So that's very good and very well off in this particular thing. So that's something that already from the get-go successfully tackles majority of the points coming from opening opposition. The fact that parents are going to be using this more carefully, that parents are going to be able to focus on other things like depression and other problematic things that are already hard enough on the parents themselves, is something that provides a lot of benefit towards it. So they go step beyond. They rebut your case and they present to me good characterization, but they also kind of flip some of the benefits and the burdens on your particular sense. It's not that parents are lazy, it's just that they're overburdened and overwhelmed by some of the things that are happening. But then they also have an extension that I'm going to now talk about in this particular thing. So closing government is claiming to add several different mechanisms in comparison towards opening government, which are going to prove why these children are going to be more successful and better off overall with this bill. Admittedly, some of these points that are mentioned as brand new are not necessarily brand new when we look into what was actually said. We mainly have 5 of them, which is behaving, making friends, like you're more likely to be able to socially interact with other kids. Fine, that's something that we can buy. Teachers, on the other hand, is something that we already have on opening government. Teachers being able to listen to you, catering to you, they're not labeling you problem child, not throwing you out, and all of these things. We have some additional implication, like writing your recommendation, but that's something that goes on opening government. First job employer, fine. That's an addition. Spiraling and stopping them from spiraling, from shoplifting and all of these things. You do add a different take on this in terms of shoplifting and all of these things, but I have this already from the Prime Minister's speech about talking about curbing the worst possible behavior. And a lot of things is like being distracted and all these things, so you can focus on other things. So you do add a lot of different and additional mechanism, and I think that's credited as an extension. However, when we compare that towards opening government and opening government's mechanism, a lot of these mechanisms are already present in opening government. But on the other hand, opening government has additional stuff beyond that. They talk about the violence that the resorts that parents can take if they don't have this option, which are much worse in the relationship with the parents. They also talk about why the relationship will be better and conversations will be better. And lastly, they also talk about this habit forming and actually this transforming into something that is sustainable for the future. All of these things you add on top of it, but it's never clear to us fully why does it overtake opening government in that sense? Even though you do have contributions, you do have good rebuttal, it's just not clear why is that the winning case, and we wanted and needed to have more weighing that is not reliant on saying that opening government hasn't proven anything, but just actually taking the whole case of opening government that we actually saw and wrote down in comparison towards what you have brought us. So in that sense, it was hard to place you over opening government on the sheer quantity of things that we needed to compare between the two cases, even though CG was also quite good and had smart contributions to make. But in comparison towards opening opposition, you still, how do you say, first of all, successfully rebut their characterization, successfully rebut their abuse point, and you successfully add a lot of these mechanisms about the children's outcome, which to us was better proven and better mechanized than things that are left standing after your rebuttal towards opening opposition. So in that sense, you overtake opening opposition. Then let's come to closing opposition. In closing opposition, we had a lot of trouble placing, mostly because it was very unclear where you're heading with the extension and what is the extent of the impact that you want to prove to us. In the end, the way that we understood your case is there is like a lot of societal barriers and like, again, mirroring the thing that already opening opposition to some extent said, which is that you don't solve structural reasons and structural problems of the society, but what you try to do is that you, on your side, are actually going to solve this particular thing. But you fall into kind of a trap in this particular sense, because your ability on the way to prove this particular thing is to say that with this pill, you're less likely to be, how do you say, challenging the narratives of society. You're less likely you're going to be able to go to protest or something against the government. But the problem and the biggest form of analysis that needs to be there, if you want us to buy that point being analyzed to the fullest, is actually why in the absence of pill, they would do so or something like this. I have only one thing, which is that young people are more progressive or something like this, but I don't have reasons and structural reasons why young people and how young people will be changing the world if they are not given the pill to the extent. But the second thing, it also relies on a more extreme characterization of parents giving this all the time, every time, and not having any conversations or any inputs from the child itself, which is something that is to some extent proven by opening government, is not fully addressed by closing opposition in that sense. Then what we're left standing is a lot of additional rebuttal that we're gaining towards government teams. But the problem is a lot of the rebuttal that you're claiming is fully taking down opening governments and closing governments material. Like, they say the habits will form, so we are going to disprove that habits will form. The problem is that the levels of analysis that you provide us do not go beyond the assertion that these habits will not form. They're citing and quoting other external factors that might make it harder for these habits to form, but they never disprove what opening government has brought to me, which is like if you continuously go to school, you start to pay more attention, you become better at it, so you how do you say, form a habit of going to school, or similarly not taking drugs or something like this. So we have a level of analysis coming from opening government in this particular sense that was never fully taken down, rather than just providing to me a counter assertion that no, they're not right, it's not correct. So you never tackle their mechanism, never tackle that particular point. So if you are able to maybe, how do you say, bridge that gap, then maybe the call would be altered in a different way. But even insofar that your rebuttal goes maybe a bit beyond what opening opposition has said, is still not enough to overtake opening government or closing government's material to the point where the exact mechanisms that they say are still standing and are not tackled in this particular sense. So then we are left with comparing the case from opening opposition, which has, how do you say, negative influence on the parents, on the parent-child-children relationship, potential rebellious phase afterwards, which can ruin the child's life and like ruin to some extent society, and potential negative impacts on the development of a child, versus something that to us seems like a very hard burden for you to prove, which is societal change and structural changes, which if you wanted to prove, and if you indeed proven, would have been a good point, but it actually needs a lot more time for you to prove to us that, how do you say, in the absence of pill, societies change and it becomes something like it becomes much better for something. It's not necessarily impossible, it's just something that is not coming from the case, and hence it's very hard to credit in this particular sense. So when we compare with opening opposition, we still believe that despite them failing to fully address opening government cases and how do you say, not winning against them, they still have more material that is like at least throwing a dent on why this motion should not be passed, whilst it's harder for us to buy at this point about changing in society and all of these things was analyzed enough. So that's pretty much, I think I compared all of the things, and it's pretty much how do you say what I wanted to say. Please feel free to message. I cannot promise that I will answer immediately because I have a lot of CA duties to do. So I'll try my best to answer as quickly as possible tomorrow or maybe on Monday. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch. And